Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a returning guest, David Quintieri. He is best known for his books, The Money GPS, and his latest book, The Global Economic Collapse. He is the owner and creator of the YouTube channel and website, The Money GPS. That's moneygps.com. And I am very happy to have David back on the X22 Report Spotlight. David, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Hey, thanks for being here. And let's just start off with the global economy right now. And we know that there's a huge amount of debt out there. And we've been looking at the different central banks where, they're continually keeping the rates very low. They're continually pushing the stimulus out there. And I wanted to get your take on what you see, from all the research that you've been doing. Is the global economy fine? Are we doing okay? Or is it continually breaking down?
What I see is pockets. So if you look at one particular aspect, let's say the US stock market, you might get one picture. And then you look over in a different stock market, you get a completely different picture. You look at the real estate market in one area, you get a different picture. And everything right now is seemingly all interconnected in one way. And it's all based on central bank intervention. Those bills or that currency that's digitally printed is finding its way into particular assets. It is not becoming all linear. That's the weird thing about this. I'm noticing this ever since the financial crisis. We've seen these distortions taking place. And it doesn't make sense. If you look at it historically before 2008 and also before 2000 to a lesser degree, nothing makes sense fundamentally. So I look at the economy and overall I would say it's bad. But if you look at particular areas like Manhattan real estate, if I were to just judge real estate by looking at Manhattan, I would get a completely different picture than looking at, let's say, US real estate even. You get a very different picture. Look at Canada. You look at the whole country, you see average returns. Look at one area like Toronto, for example, and you see the biggest bubble in real estate right now. So that's the way I really have to look at it. You can see that it all starts from central bank, their monetary easing, their low interest rate policies, and then that blows up these bubbles in different parts of the world, different asset classes.
So you just mentioned bubbles, and you said, okay, let's look at housing, and let's just stay on the track of housing right now. When we look at housing, we're seeing housing prices continually increasing. I mean, this is what they're telling us, and you can see it in certain areas. And you can see it in certain cities, like you mentioned Toronto, Vancouver's another place. Here in the United States, you can see it in San Francisco. You can also see housing bubbles in China. Even in the United Kingdom, they're talking about prices continually moving up and up and up. And many of these places, they're saying that the bubbles are starting to maybe deflate or pop. When you look at housing, are the bubbles today larger than they were back in 2008, or are they pretty much the same, or are we better off?
Unequivocally, yes. They're bigger today than they were ever before. It's madness right now. You look at how bad, Toronto as an example, it's completely unaffordable to the masses. That's when you know it's gone far beyond reason. And a lot of people will say that it's the foreign investors that are coming in and purchasing properties. And that is to some degree making the prices go up. But it's domestically. When you allow the central banks to bring interest rates this low globally, you will encounter this. The amount of debt that people are taking on today is more than ever. And so you will get bubbles that are bigger than ever. That's inevitable. That's the way it's going to happen. That's exactly the statistics that I talk about all the time. When we look at interest rates being this low, you look at the fact that people are in their debt to income ratios, highest ever. You'll see that people are taking home equity line of credits. People are talking about how I see people at the store all the time. They're buying iPhones. They're buying, this or that. How's that possible if the economy's not doing well? Well, of course, we look at it on a deeper level, and you'll see the truth. Home equity line of credits, second mortgages are the number one reason for this. There's less bankruptcies today than there were 10 years ago. Why? Because we are seeing the fact that people are just basically, if they need that money to pay off their credit card, they just take a home equity line of credit, pay it off. At the same time, you still have a credit card bubble, you have a student debt bubble, you have all these bubbles that are appearing. But what's saving it is the fact that they're able to use their inflated asset prices, back to central banking, to be able to survive. And they think that everything's all good and everything's all fine, but that's not the case. And it eventually has to break because there's only so much debt that one individual can take. Whether it happens in a week or a year or 5 years or 10 years, I don't know the timing, but there are certain indicators that we can keep an eye on.
And what are these indicators that you're looking at?
The number one indicator that I'm looking for is interest rates. If interest rates get too high, they will burst the bubble. There's nothing that they can do except for hand people money. If you think that the government's going to hand you a check in the mail, well, maybe they will with this whole universal basic income, but it doesn't seem like that's coming anytime soon. So I'm looking at interest rates. Once they get to about 4%, maybe 5%, if I had to put my finger on it, that's got to be the breaking point. I don't see it being able to withstand that. I mean, you look at the mortgages, they would be destroyed. And it wouldn't happen that day. See, it would have to wait for that refinancing moment. So whether it's that 3 years or 5 years or whenever those mortgages are coming up, people are going to have to take a much, much higher rate of interest. There's no way they can afford that. You look at everything that goes along with that, business loans and everything else, you're going to collapse the economy. So many people would say that, well, then they won't do it because they're going to collapse the economy. Well, we'll talk about that more in a bit. I don't want to get into that right now, but certainly another indicator that we need to understand is the fact that there is this monetary easing that's been taking place, QE. They've been printing up trillions and trillions, and I think the number was something like 15 trillion or so. They printed that up, whether you're looking at the ECB, you're looking at the Federal Reserve, Bank of Japan, and so on. They've all printed up these trillions of dollars. They say, this is the claim, that they're going to bring back over $1 trillion US worth over the next 12 months. If they do that, you're going to see the markets come down. It's just a fact. Look at the charts. G3 central bank balance sheet corresponds to US bonds, US stocks, everything. You can match it up. And then you look at all the central banks that have been buying all of these stocks, whether it's the Bank of Japan buying, they're basically the biggest, they're the only one that's buying Japanese anything right now. You look at the US stocks that are being purchased by the SNB, the Swiss National Bank. Just, you can see this, how the way it works. Those are the two most basic indicators that I think everybody should be following, everybody should be paying attention to. It's very simple. And I think that will be the most important thing that we need to pay attention to realize when this is going to happen.
Now, are you worried about China? They also have a housing bubble and they have a huge amount of debt. And recently, the Chinese government, they, came out and said, hey, we're going to start buying real estate to ease the bubble. I mean, when you hear this, is this a big problem?
Most people have amnesia. And this is a problem that I've had with individuals. I have to read it in the financial media. I see it all the time. I see it every day, in fact. And they think that the government can prevent a crisis. That's not the way it works. It has never worked like that before. So, of course, it's not going to work like that now. They claim that doing their, whatever it is, buying assets of any type, stocks, real estate, garbage, toxic debt, whatever it might be, they never end up being able to resolve the issue. And I believe that the reason that they do this, they use this crisis as a method to be able to accumulate assets. And the people will be so happy. Just like, for example, in Canada, everything is riding on real estate rising. If real estate starts coming down, let's say 5%, 10%, and then the Canadian government says, don't worry, we'll step in, we'll save the day, but you have to make this concession or that or whatever, you will see people just saying, okay, that's fine, just do what you got to do. Just make sure my home prices don't go down. Just make sure my stock prices don't go down. Doesn't matter what they have to do. If they have to pay back in taxes, it's a bailout, it's a TARP bailout, whatever it is the case, if they have to do bail-ins even, that's how silly people are sometimes. They will allow it to happen. And I believe that it is all about a consolidation of power and money. And the government is a tool for corporations. That's what a lot of people don't realize this. They see them as separate. They may say, yeah, there's corruption, but they don't understand that government is simply a tool for corporations to use to consolidate wealth and power.
So, we're talking about government, corporations, consolidation of power, and right now the corporations, they do have a lot of power. Right now we know the central banks have a lot of power. We see the stock market continually moving up. We're at 23,000 Dow, and everyone's thinking that this is never going to come down. It's just going to keep going up. And some people are saying, 50,000 Dow, 100,000 Dow. When you look at the market, and it just came out that, we haven't had a correction in quite a while, like a 3% correction. What do you make of the stock market right now?
I think that it is a complete fraud. And what I'm seeing today is the exact same euphoria that we saw in the dot-com boom. Not necessarily because of tech stocks. The fact that average people are starting to pour their money in is very worrisome. People with no knowledge at all, they just see that there's this wave, they want to ride it, so they get on in. What I am seeing, as I mentioned earlier, is the fact that central banks have been buying shares and they've been pushing the stock market up. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not a joke. That's nothing. That is a fact. That's a fact. The Swiss National Bank, you can see their 13F available on the SEC's own website. It is confirmed. They are buying shares of Apple, of all of the big companies. I covered it on my channel. And You'll see that. You'll know that. But the question remains, will they pull back on their asset purchases? Perhaps, perhaps not. We'll see. But that they've made that claim that they're going to do that. I don't know. What they're going to do exactly. We'll have to see. Whatever they seem to say at these meetings that they have, they always end up taking way too long to actually go ahead and do it. So I'm not too sure. But I would have to say that these bubbles are unsustainable. And that's the purpose. They created the bubble in the first place. They want it to become unsustainable. They want a crisis to, in fact, occur so that they can create, for example, they had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They got all these trillions of dollars. And it was garbage debt. Everybody knows that. Subprime crisis, everything happened. And you look at this, what did they do? They basically took it on their backs. That's it. So you transferred all that garbage debt that some banker somewhere are making a hell of a lot of money off of. And the government says, don't worry, we'll take that from you. This is all part of the plan. It was known that before those loans should have never have happened. They should have been evaporated in some way. They shouldn't have never have been given out, but they are created by the banking system. Of course, then you have the fractional reserve. You have derivatives on top of that. There's no way that this should have ever been allowed to occur. But of course it does. As a result, you and I will be paying for it forever.
So do you think the Fed will be able to unwind their balance sheet right now? They're talking about unwinding it. They're not dumping everything, but do you think they'll even be able to do it?
They might be able to do it a little bit, just, to make it seem like they're going ahead and actually pulling back on their quantitative easing. If they are going to go ahead and actually seriously pull back, I would say that this is it. This is going to be the crash. There's no way. There's absolutely no way that the market can sustain itself because the economy is completely dead. When you look at all of the actual real statistics, shipping, for example, dry shipping, whatever you want to, the Baltic Dry Index, for example, look at everything that's actually real. We've seen these stats come out over the years, and you show me something like the unemployment rate, and I laugh at that. It's a joke. Who believes this? Who is out there believing it? I feel sorry for these people that are looking at the unemployment rate and saying, look, the economy is doing better. And meanwhile, they have homeless on every street corner. That's what I see in Toronto. I'm sure it's the same in many other cities. You walk down the downtown, you see homeless on every street corner. And you look 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. But today, it is the case. Things are getting worse, much worse, in fact. But it's okay because as long as somebody bought their 4 shares of Apple and they're happy to see it rise, that's not the way it works. And I think people are very, very blindsided by the potential gains.
Do you think that the Fed right now is trying to keep the economy up? Do you think they're holding it steady at this point because they know if they do anything, it will come down?
I don't think that they have. I don't think they have much of a influence. as much as people give them. All they're doing is setting this interest rate low. That's it. That's basically what they are, and they're just waiting. Whoever's giving them the orders, they are basically just waiting for enough people to pull in. They want all of the assets basically to be bought up by either the central banks, number one, or to get actually the average individual in there, because they want to destroy them. They want them to be punished, and then when the prices go down significantly, then you'll have a guy like Warren Buffett coming in with Bank of America. Oh, don't worry, I'll bail it out, even though he's all part of the insiders. Sure, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have big people like Warren Buffett's come out there. You're going to have the government come out there, and they will be able to purchase assets at a very cheap price when this crisis really takes hold. You don't need to be a genius to figure this out. Just look at what happened during the financial crisis. This exact same thing is going to occur, except it's a hell of a lot worse today. The Federal Reserve is there to be basically the head of the snake. They're all working together. I don't see them as separate entities, although technically they are sort of quasi-government, semi-private institution. They aren't going to necessarily listen to what the government tells them to do, but I think that there are people much higher that are giving both sides of this equation the orders, and they're going to wait. They want more people to be sucked in, and they're going to be destroyed.
I mean, your latest book is The Global Economic Collapse. In your book, do you lay out how this is going to happen?
I do get into various topics in that book. I mean, it's very short, actually. It's only about 100 pages. And what I did was I didn't want to write an update to the Money GPS because that's a lot of history. It's foundation. I have the asset classes and everything else. Then on this book, I took some of the familiar concepts, but then I get into other things where I talk about actual solutions. And it's what I call the Money GPS strategy. And that is essentially, we're fighting for this money, and this money is controlled by the central bankers. And they may decide to drop the stock market tomorrow or increase housing prices, and they make it very wild and erratic. And we don't know what to do at any given time. We have to, you and I know how it is. I mean, all the viewers know, look how much we have to intensely focus just to be able to keep up with this madness. So my strategy is basically, this system is corrupt. I know that, and I want to get away from it as much as possible. And that's self-sufficiency. So instead of worrying if my power prices are going to go up year after year, which they always do, I'd rather have something like solar panels or geothermal or some way to provide for myself. And the same with your food supply and everything else. If not to get off the grid necessarily, but just to be able to have a more steady and stable environment for yourself and your family. So that's what I get into a lot in the final section of the Global Economic Collapse. I also get into exactly what's going on. I get much more, let's say, hardcore than I did in the Money GPS, which is a little bit more, let's say, educational. And this one is talking about more of the inside of what's really going on. So they're definitely different books, not necessarily a continuation or anything like that.
When this system comes down, I mean, do you feel that the dollar, as the system, breaks apart, you think the dollar is pretty much at its end stage right now?
That's the one thing that I think about all the time, because ultimately it's overdue historically. Everybody knows that. What they'll do to replace it, I think that a crisis will come, maybe not this next crisis, but maybe at some point in the future. What we will see is some sort of crisis that occurs. You get the G20 and the IMF, World Bank, and everybody all comes together and they have to come up with a solution to the crisis. Of course, that's already been prepared in advance. And I think we'll see something along the lines of a SDR. I think that would be the most realistic thing. But we, as the citizens of Canada, US, UK, Australia, we won't be using that SDR to go pay for your bills and everything else. I think we'll use our own currency. That currency will be backed by something like an SDR, some sort of supranational entity's currency that exists behind there, and that issuing authority, whatever that is, will decide just like they do in, for example, Greece. They make decisions beyond the monetary authority in that country. They decide what happens. So I think that would be a very similar instance to what will occur in the future here. So it's not quite government control, global government, or whatever you want to call it. I think it'll be a little bit more subtle than that, so that people don't really realize the influence that they have, but they need to know that it will be very, very serious. I think that this is the way that they'll do it. So they won't have to go to a new reserve currency that people really understand. They'll do it in a way that people won't need to understand what's going on. They can go about their merry life, 9 to 5. Their stocks and everything are on the rise again, and everything's been fixed and resolved, and they all came together, and so on and so forth. That's how I think they'll present it to us.
So do you think that the new currency, whatever they do here, is it going to be the same value? Do you think it will be devalued? Because if we go to the SDR as a higher level type of currency, the currency that the people are using, especially here in the United States, since the United States was the reserve currency, what happens at that time?
I think that and this is just historical, all currencies will be devalued against real goods. That's the way I see it. So whether this happens overnight or what have you, I don't know how they're going to be able to do this. From what I've read about with the Bretton Woods and the previous classical gold standard and everything else that we've seen, it's always very disruptive right after it happens, but they may phase it in. So I'm not sure how they're going to do it, but I think that ultimately in a longer term scenario, your currency that you're using today will be devalued against real goods. And that's why it's important to be able to have assets. If you have, for example, some real estate, well, hopefully that real estate will rise compared to your currency. It's not really good to have cash as a means of savings. Even though, certain assets could fall, it's still better to have assets than it is to have cash in the bank or under your mattress, other than emergency situations, of course. That's the way I see it. That's why I like my money GPS strategy, where I basically say, who knows what's going to happen in the future? So we can take out some of that guesswork and be able to provide for ourselves.
Do you think cryptocurrency will play a role? Because Christine Lagarde from the IMF came out and said that, she sees Bitcoin, playing a role. We know that UBS and many of the other banks, central bank systems, they're trying to create their own type of coin where they can say they can stabilize it, where you don't have the fluctuation like Bitcoin or Litecoin or Dash. Do you see cryptocurrency playing a role in any of this?
I do. I think all of the central banks are probably going to jump on board and get into some sort of either blockchain-based or cryptocurrency-based monetary system. I don't know if that's going to be a global thing or what have you, but I think for the time being, like you can see the crypto ruble in Russia, you're seeing that now. It's coming out in the news. In terms of what they're going to do with it, I think it's so new that not even these groups know what to do with it, but they're just jumping on the bandwagon and they're just going ahead with it. I think that they definitely will not be using some of the, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any of these. I don't see countries utilizing those in any way. I think those will be seen as competition. They'll be, maybe deemed illegal or something like this. Who knows what they're going to do, but they'll fail at that anyway. I think that they're going that way regardless. I don't understand why. I've made this comment before, but I don't even understand why a central bank would ever want this, because they are already in charge of the printing press. They already do whatever it is that they want, and they don't have any competition. Competition is illegal. You can't, basically that country is forced to use that particular currency. So I'm not even sure why they're doing this, and that's something that I'm consistently thinking about. What is the purpose of it? It's really mind-boggling to me. I think that it's useless, because their currency as it is fiat. It has no value. It has no meaning at all. And they force us to use it. That's the only reason we use Canadian dollars, US dollars, whatever, is because we have to. If there was competition out there, well, maybe we would choose something else, but we can't. So that's the reason why they're really putting down Bitcoin and all these other cryptocurrencies. So it's a little sketchy, to say the least.
Well, maybe they're looking at this and saying, okay, the Bitcoin or Litecoin or Dash or Ethereum, it's all decentralized. They have no control over it. And if more and more people get, I mean, right now it's a very small market where people, they hear about it, but they're really not in it. If more and more people get in it and more businesses start to use it where they start selling, their products and they'll accept, Bitcoin or whatever coin is out there, maybe the central bankers are nervous that, everyone will start doing that, because once people start purchasing goods in the cryptocurrency, they can also get paid in the cryptocurrency. And this would really then bypass what they have going right now. And maybe this is why they're trying to tell everyone, oh yeah, it's a good thing, trying to play the game and trying to maybe then move everyone into their system.
It's certainly possible. I mean, we're going to have to see and really keep a close eye on this, because I think it's very different in different countries, where you're seeing, like China, for example, is really hitting hard on trying to prevent all of the, whether it's Bitcoin or any of these digital currencies, trying to shut down the exchanges, trying to make it more and more difficult. And you see other countries that are really not even interested in it right at this point. So I don't know how long this is going to take to unfold, but you can see that the interest in cryptocurrency, whether it's on the central bank side or individuals, has really, really escalated just in the last, let's say, year even.
Yes, that is true. And one thing I do know is the central banks, they like to have control of everything. So this is the only thing I can think of why they are trying to get into it and saying it's a good thing so they can have control of it. That's the only thing I can think of. Going back to the economy now, and we've been talking about bubbles, we've been talking about, the real economy. When you look at the economy, I mean, we've been going for quite a while now. The central banks have been, pumping up the entire economy, keeping the illusion alive, but we're seeing a lot of things deteriorate very, very quickly. I mean, you look at retail, stores are closing left and right. We see that the statistics that you mentioned before, unemployment, even GDP, and many others, they're all manipulated. And we see housing, starting to falter. And if rates do go up, it's game over. How much longer, I mean, from when everything that you're looking at, how much longer do we actually have where the central bank can keep this illusion alive? Because people are going to start to realize, like, okay, every single store is closing. This makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, when you look at it, how long can they keep the illusion alive that we're still doing well?
Realistically, I think it can go for a few more years. I'm a little bit easier on some than others have made predictions based on time. To me, it should have been crashed a long time ago, and we would have already been recovering now. If this was a real crash and there was no intervention by a central bank, it would have already have happened. Things would have been restored. Companies would have gone bankrupt, and that would have been great. It's hard, but it's great in a way because we can restore order. But we haven't had that since 1920. A year and a half it took after the crash, the depression actually of 1920. A year and a half, and everything was booming again. Then we had the roaring 20s. And since that moment, we've never had really any sense of reality in the markets, not even a sliver of it. So when I look around and I see the statistics pouring in, you mentioned the retail stores. Look at the malls. Now, yes, the US does have a lot of square footage for malls basically per capita. I saw a statistic on this, much more than, for example, Europe. And that is one reason. Maybe there are too many, but it's widespread. It's pervasive. Then when you look at the statistics, what's happening, basically more and more of these malls are taking in other types of businesses, small schools and libraries and all sorts of different things. You realize that those other businesses aren't coming back. And there's a new paradigm that's occurring where people are they're shopping online, yes, and they are not going into the brick and mortars for a lot of things, but still, you're just seeing the general economy itself in a decline. Not everywhere, not every store, of course. I mean, you look at Amazon, for example, is doing very well. But if you look at their PE ratios on a lot of these stocks, things are out of whack. So maybe it's doing well, but the stock prices don't correspond to the actual earnings, to the actual health of that particular company. And that's what people don't realize. take the example, Venezuela. This is an extreme example, but yes, the government can be there to support you. Look, they keep on raising the minimum wage. They did so in the US. They're doing so in Ontario, for example. And sure, they can continue to increase it, but they're doing the same thing in Venezuela, and everything is terrible there. So they increase the minimum wage, and they increase it and increase it. That's not helping. They just take over more and more businesses. Oh, you're having a problem with this, whatever it might be, the food suppliers. Okay, we'll take it over. And what happens? Well, it doesn't fix the problem. They can't just nationalize different industries and start taking over things and pulling everything out of whack. It doesn't resolve the problem. It only gets worse. And Venezuela is the crystal ball to the most extreme example that we are seeing today of how ludicrous government policies are.
So, I mean, we're kind of seeing that here, but not to the extreme where, government, the central bank, they're taking over everything. I mean, they're buying stocks. They bought up the toxic real estate, and, they're doing pretty much the same thing. We haven't gotten to that point where, they've also bailed out businesses where they gave them a lot of money. So we have seen this before. It's not like it's not new. And I'm sure that we'll see a lot more of this as things start to implode on it. The whole economy implodes on itself.
Definitely we will. And if you just take, for example, just a few years back, well, time flies, it's more than a few years, but during the financial crisis, we saw all these different, it started maybe with the subprime, but you saw all the cracks appearing all of a sudden, very quickly. So everything was fine up until subprime. Then, oh, wait a minute, we have a big problem. Oh, don't worry, it's just subprime. And then a week later, oh no, wait a minute, it's the entire banking industry. Oh, wait a minute, it's this and this and this. And we just kept hearing about all these different things that all of a sudden just appeared out of nowhere where everything was really bad. No, we need to take it for how it is in reality. We can't just look at the FANG stocks and say the economy is doing well. That has nothing to do with the real economy. And maybe you as an individual, you've invested in Facebook or Amazon and you are producing, let's just say an increase in your asset prices. But does that really help you in the end if, for example, those will come down, or if your boss decides to give you a pink slip? Is that going to help you? Well, of course. That's really the way I look at it. Don't look at these very, very small indicators like a select handful of stocks pushing up the entire stock market. And even, by the way, global stocks are not doing that well. You look at US stocks, they're not doing that well. But you look at particular US stocks, the ones that are being purchased by the central banks, those ones are doing well. That's how, you have to narrow it down so far. You have to drill down further and further to get the reality.
David, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
You can check me out on YouTube. Just type in The Money GPS and you'll see I post videos every single day, so you'll definitely be able to get a lot of information covering similar topics as yourself. So that's The Money GPS.
David, once again, thank you very much for being on the Spotlight. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.